Okay, so welcome everybody to our second session of this wonderful, amazing book study. If you haven't done so, if you could please put in the chat your favorite part of your culture, just so that we can take attendance. And thank you for everybody that has. I have a lot of really good answers. We have food, music, hairstyles. I want to look that one up. The Moon Festival, also going to look that one up. I think that's awesome. So thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so we'll get started. So just like last week, we kind of want to start traditions with you guys because we think those are important. And last week we had, not last week, but 2 weeks ago, we had a land acknowledgement, and I want to continue. So I'm currently also from the AV, so I'm going to make my land acknowledgement from the AV, but I'm actually from Pear Blossom, Little Rock area. That's where I grew up. So I definitely want to acknowledge the people that were there before me. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to Devil's Punch Bowl. It is like a beautiful place, or I mean, it's currently not looking so great because there was fires last year, but it's definitely a great place to visit if once things start to get to normal. But yes, Pear Blossom and Little Rock, I want to acknowledge all of those that came before us. Oh, we're neighbors. Look at that. I'm looking at the chat and I have a couple neighbors. It's the best. If you've never been to, whenever I tell people I live in Pear Blossom, they always think I live on that street, that Pear Blossom Highway Street that's kind of like, a little shady. But no, it's quiet, it's peaceful, it's a great neighborhood. There's so many great people out there and it's a great community. So come visit whenever you'd like. Okay. Moving on. So we have our agenda for today. So we're going to go over our objectives. We're going to review our norms, just review some of the logistics to make sure that you know how you would get paid for being part of this PD. We did a survey at the end of last PD if you attended, and we're going to go over some of the results from that survey. We're going to do a discussion of chapter 2, which was all about culture, and that's one of the things we're trying to do is we're kind of trying to showcase this idea of culture and how you build culture and getting to know one another, building a community, and creating traditions. We also want to have a share out after you have your discussions of chapter 2. We're going to have a chapter 3 breakout, which was all about the brain, and I hope you guys enjoyed that chapter. That chapter was incredibly interesting to me. And then we're also going to have another share out to see what those aha moments were from chapter 3. And finally, we have our next steps and a quick exit ticket. So moving on. So our objectives. So today we're going to discuss how cultural archetypes and the principles of neuroscience can affect a student's ability to learn so that we can improve outcomes for all of our students of all of cultures. So every single student has their own culture. We want to make sure that we're supporting all of these students and then making sure that we apply culturally responsive teaching within our classrooms, because that is how we know that we've learned something from this book study. Hello, welcome if you're just joining us. So a quick little review of our norms. So within the book study, sometimes we'll have some really touchy subjects, and we want to make sure that everyone has the right to have an opinion and to have a voice and to feel comfortable when they're doing this. So we do ask that we all keep an open mind and heart in the discussions, and kind of realize that we all have our culture. That was what chapter 2 was about. We all come from a place and we all have opinions because of the place that we came from. We want to make sure that we listen to one another because we all bring different experience. And so it's important to have that mentality of I am going to be an active listener while my partner or my peer is talking. Seek understanding and growth. Monitor your airtime. This one's big for me. I'm a talker. I'm so sorry. I am a talker. So sometimes I over talk, but making sure that we allow every member in our group, especially during the breakouts, to have an opportunity to talk. Be present and active while you participate. This is such a amazing study, and I think it's important for us to just we have an hour to be here and learn what we each learn from the book. There were assignments in Google Classrooms, I believe about maybe 10 out of 14 people have completed them the last time I checked. That just is because you get paid extra hours, 2 extra hours for completing the assignment. So we want to just kind of remind you that that is there and available for you. If you didn't complete it, that's totally okay. We know that it's a busy time and we're all tired. That's kind of how we started. So we totally understand that. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable or you feel like, oh, this is just let us know, because we want to make sure that every single member feels comfortable. And if there's anything that you guys feel that we need to add to the norms, please do not hesitate to let us know. So anything that you guys want to add, or are we good? Good. Okay, I'm going to move on then. So we have logistics. So like I stated earlier, you read 2 chapters a week, and then you have an assignment that gives you a total of 2 hours for the assignment and then 1 hour for joining us. Now, as I'm getting to like the 4th slide, I realized I didn't introduce myself. I have a habit of not doing that. So I'm going to take a minute to introduce myself. I'm Yasmin Crotty, and with me, I have 2 amazing people. I have David Rivas and Ben Jefferson, who will be helping out in the chat as well. But we are here to just really discuss culture and the brain today. So thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions in terms of the logistics, please do not hesitate to let us know. You get paid at the end of this book study. So at the end of the book study, you will get paid. We submit all of the hours for you guys. So you don't have to sign anything. Just be present and make sure you sign in and maybe sign out when you leave. A quick reminder that we also have a Padlet where you can also continue your discussion on the book. We try to add to the Padlet just information or things that we find, just so that you know that you'll always have access to the Padlet. And we left the discussions from the books summer book study because we wanted you to kind of read and see what other staff members, their thoughts that they had. And then do you feel that they're similar? Do you agree? I felt like it's just another way for you to communicate your thoughts. So we're going to start with the results from the survey, and I'm going to share this tab instead. So at the end of the last session, we gave you guys a survey, and it was just really on culture and your background and who where you grew up and your upbringing, because every single person may have a different upbringing. And we wanted to present some of the results of the survey so that you can get a sense of all of those around you. We all come from different places, different backgrounds, and it's just a good way for us to kind of see, okay, I get it. Like, you came from the city, you came from a rural area. I will have a little confession. When I was prepping for this, I accidentally, and not on purpose, really, accidentally read David Rivas's answers, and I'm like, oh, I got to know David a lot better because I was like, this is a great survey. This is so cool. I really got to say, oh, wow, I understand and see where David is coming from and who he is. It was really neat. I didn't put names when presenting this information, and I left the results from the summer presentation as well so that we can kind of glance at it together. So let me press present. And I'm kind of going to go through it pretty quickly because I want to make sure that we have time to discuss. So my family identifies as, this one was really interesting for me because out of so many contestants, we all had such different answers. It wasn't just I am white, or I'm Mexican, or I'm American. It was really like, this is who I am. And I did simplify the answers, and there was many more answers, but I wanted you guys to get a general idea of how we perceive ourselves, because that's important. It always starts with reflecting on ourselves. Okay. Then the next one is, we lived mostly in suburban. Suburban was the most popular in the summer. So the smaller graph is the summer, and then the bigger one is for us. My family story in America is generations. We have a lot of people who have lived in America for generations. My family's economic status. This one kind of was a little bit like, even in terms of middle class and working class. Okay. Which best describes you? We have we have a pretty good split in terms of first family member to attend college, or being someone has already attended college before me. So it's just interesting for me to kind of see these. And these were some of the answers. I try to make sure that I didn't put the really personal answers down. But I'm going to kind of scroll through them quickly, and you have access to this presentation. So if you want to read further ahead, it was very interesting for me. Villains and anti-heroes, look at that. Some men, politicians, it just changes from everyone. As a child, what I called adults. This one's also interesting to me because we sometimes we think that students have a set way of like, he's a student, should call me Mr. and Mrs. But if that's not how they grew up, this can cause issues in terms of like maybe behavior management in the classroom. What got someone shunned or shamed in my family? Here's a couple answers. What earned praise more? And like I said, I'm kind of going through this quick because I don't want to use up the whole time on this. But you have access to this, and you can definitely take time to see how we all kind of came out. Are each going to be able to have your own discussions. But for me, I really enjoyed her take on surface, shallow, and deep. I felt like this was fascinating to me because we often think of culture, we think of food, we think of music, we think of the way that you dress, but there's just so much more to culture. It's how you view the world. And I really enjoyed how she kind of went very deeply into this. There was also a whole section on individual versus collectivism. And I mean, it's interesting because it's like, where do I fall within this? Do I find myself more as an individual, or am I a collective, or am I part of a group? And I find that I'm both. There are moments where I'm individual, and there are moments where I prefer to be part of a group. So it's to me, it was very fascinating, the perspective that she gave us in regards to this. Then we had implicit bias that we may already have. What does, the difference between equality and equity? And something that really resonated with me was this quote: we routinely put the less experienced teachers with the neediest students. I absolutely thought this was a fascinating concept because she explains how when you're a doctor, you put the more experienced doctor with the student, with the patient that has the most need. And I just thought, like, wow, in schools, we do the opposite. We actually always have the newer teachers with, the students who tend to be more struggling, because our honor teachers are the ones that have had the most experience. So I loved this perspective. And I thought that it really resonated with me. So with that being said, now I'm going to put you in groups, and I have 3 questions. And the way that we do this is I can provide the questions, but really it's ultimately what you got out of the chapter. And you get 10 to 15 minutes, about 15 minutes to discuss with your group the main ideas that struck with you in chapter 2, how your cultural influences impact how you view your colleagues and your students, and how do you experience structural, I can't say it, racialization? How do you believe your students experience it? Someone was kind enough and turned the lights on, so I appreciate that. Okay, so I'm gonna put you in groups. Please introduce yourselves, get to know one another, what do you teach, because that is part of it as well. And then these questions are there for you. They're also in the Google Classroom. So if you want access to them, you can access them through the Google Classroom. So I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. Anything that you guys would like to discuss? Anything from your discussion that you'd like to share out?
I was in breakout room 5. We had a pretty good discussion trying to grasp the idea of the differences in the cultural layers, surface, shallow, and deep. Just trying to understand what those meant.
Okay. Do you feel like that was there was a good understanding, or did you guys have similar thought process?
I think we were similar. Maybe it's for us, understanding the shallow and the surface, those are pretty, but it seems like shallow overlaps with surface and with deep, but so just trying to see what the differences were.
Okay. Well, thank you, Terry. Anyone else would like to share out?
Yeah, we were talking about the different ways that different cultures look at taking care of their parents.
Okay.
In some cultures, the parents are fully aware and knowledge and acknowledging the fact that you will take care of me when I'm older.
Right.
And it seems in America we have designed a different kind of way of doing things with retirement plans and savings plans and things like that that can unburden the children from the later years in life of having to care for their parents, and other societies or cultures have not really done that or gotten away from that.
And I'm glad you said, Aaron. Aaron shared with us something really awesome. He shared us a podcast that really looked at what makes America different, and they really focused on some of that. I'm glad you shared that. The individualism versus collective. There's a big portion on that, and I'll share the link at the end so that you guys can listen. I learned so much from that, so I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Shanika?
Hi. Our group, we talked about how um, within our cultures, being people of color, we have both the collectivism and the individualism. I shared how within my home we definitely have more of an individualistic culture in the house. My parents and my siblings, we lived a certain way, but being a black woman, black culture definitely is very collective in nature, but again, kind of living these different identities, to a certain extent. um that was an aha moment for me, because when I was reading the description, I was like, oh no, I'm totally from the individualistic culture. And then just kind of continuing to read chapter 2, I was like, oh, but again, the nature of African American culture is coming from very collective cultures and communities. And to me, that also spoke to, I didn't share this in the group, but something that was an aha for me was just going back to, and I don't mean to be triggering, but I mean, it's a harsh reality. It's just going back to, the enslavement of Black people, and losing so much of their cultural identity when coming. And, we, in a lot of ways, we don't identify with, African culture as Black people in America because we're so far removed from it. So our home cultures can be a hodgepodge of different, parts of our identity. It's not wholly collective and it's not wholly individualistic. It's definitely a blend of both. And it just kind of depends on who your family is and what the experience is. We grew up very individualistic and far removed from family because we lived like 1,500 miles away from family. So we were the family we had.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really loved the different identities. I love when you mentioned that, because I agree. I mean, I said it earlier. Sometimes I feel like I'm individualistic. Other times I feel like I'm going to collect. So it just kind of depends on the atmosphere. I also think it depends on your setting, and the culture. Every setting, I truly believe you have your family setting, you have your work setting, you have, your friendship setting, and you are, I feel like a different, I don't want to say different person because I'm not a different person in each setting, but I feel like there's different aspects of me that come out. And that kind of ties a little bit to the brain chapter, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I do see 2 more hands. So I'm going to let those 2 more people go. So I believe it was Caroline.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the individualism and collectivism. Our group was talking about that, like what that looks like for the kids in the classroom. And that sometimes, like if they're coming from a country, or they're very collective at home, but then the classroom is set up more individualistic, like sometimes you could get that behavior component. because they want to be collective and they want to be talking, or they don't want to be sitting still. And so sometimes that we have to, I guess, as teachers, realize that for them to sit for 53 minutes might be asking a lot for some of these kids who are really used to being up and around, and, you know, depending on where they went to school before. And so, because I find that when I make my classroom try to be more collective, the kids have a great day and the time goes by fast. When I try to make it more individualistic, for me personally, the kids seem like they're a little bit more bored and the time goes a little bit slower.
Yeah, thank you. And it's so there's somebody who was in my group who wasn't able to join a group, and she actually brought that up. She's like, I think this kind of tells me that in my classroom I need to make sure that I allow both settings to live. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Caroline. Joyce?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell or say that what is it? Her name moved. Shanika? Okay. I really liked your share, and I really appreciate your insight. This, you know, it made me think too that, you know, I'm very open-minded, and I like that everybody is upfront and expressing their opinions. So you don't have to worry about me being offended, because it's very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Okay, so thank you guys, everyone, for sharing. So now I'm going to move on to the next chapter. If my computer, okay. Oh, so I'm going to leave you with one last quote. This was one more quote. I'm going to totally just kind of let you guys read it and sort of hopefully not and talk about it. But this I just thought was the highlight for me for chapter 2. Okay. Okay, so chapter 3. So chapter 3, I feel like chapter 2 and chapter 3 have to exist together, because what I got from reading chapter 2 was how culture is really almost like how it's explained here, something that kind of wires your brain to think a certain way. And I had never really thought about that before. Like, it had never really, it was almost like mind-blowing to me a little bit. Like, oh my gosh, yes, all of the decisions and things that I do came from part of me or a part of who I am. I loved the talk about how a student, it's going to be so difficult for students to learn in the classroom if they're under a lot of stress. I am naturally a stressed out person, and I've always wondered, where did all this stress come from, right? So when I think about my instances as a child, because, you know, I have to reflect, this entire book allowed me to reflect on me and gave me self-awareness of me, which I think is incredibly helpful as a teacher, because then you kind of go in and then realize that kids also have to be aware of who they are. And I think that kind of helps with the learning process. But when I think of being in elementary, actually kindergarten, first grade, I was the student who had the same teacher for kindergarten, first and second grade. And my perception, because this is my perception, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was the true statement. My perception of her is she reminded me of Miss Trunchbull from Matilda, if anybody is familiar with that story. Because I have this vivid image of her grabbing the desk of a student and pouring it out because it was disorganized. So I'm also a very organized person, and I realize now that that probably came from fear. My things need to be in order, or someone's going to come in and just mess up my desk. I also have always struggled with public speaking. I hate public speaking. If I put myself in situations to get myself to speak out loud, because I was in a classroom growing up where I wasn't allowed to ask questions. Questions were no. You weren't allowed to have an opinion. And so when I think about it, kinder, first and second grade were such important years for children, right? So this really allowed me to kind of think back of me and who I am as a person and how my brain is wired a certain way because of the experiences that I had. So I just figured I'd share that with you guys, because this is what it made me think of as I read through this chapter. So I kind of kept this one a little simple because I know I want to give you guys plenty of time to discuss with your peers. I think we learn best from our peers. So for chapter 3, it's very simple. A quote that really struck you or how do you feel that neuroscience is going to influence your teaching style? How do you feel that it's going to change or shift something in you? Okay, so I'm going to set up the groups again. Now, was 15 minutes too much time, or was that good? Are we good with 15 minutes, or do we want less time? No.
15 minutes works.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so let me set up breakup room. Welcome back.
Hello.
Welcome back.
I need to know how things function.
Okay. Waiting on a few more groups. Welcome back, everybody. I think we have everybody back. Okay, so chapter 3. Any aha moments that we would like to share out? Anything that we feel should be discussed as a whole group?
So I would throw in on this. One of the things that I started to think about when we started thinking about the structures of the brain and how she begins with the lizard brain or the reptilian brain, and I brought this up in my group, is how my athletes can practice and be comfortable in practice, but when we get into a competition, they seem to freeze and become frightened. And I kind of try to connect that to what happens when we give tests, and we see test anxiety, we see test people go blank during a test, things like that. And so I was kind of helping or working with the group to try to brainstorm a solution to those things, and we started to talk about mindfulness exercises, and I had got a lot of great suggestions from my group there.
That sounds awesome. Well, if you guys can share, that'd be great. I think that's a really, I love how you correlated those two, because I do believe that anxiety keeps us from, I mean, even us as individuals, like I know sometimes when I'm about to speak, I forget everything. Or, English is my second language. Sometimes when I'm too anxious, I forget the words in English that I'm supposed to use. So I appreciate that. Anybody else? We might have room for one more person.
I think it's just in our group we talked a bit about the fact that it's not just a growth mindset, that your brain actually physically can change. Then dendrites can be pruned or they can be grown, and your brain can physically grow. That's pretty cool. So the growing mindset is not just metaphorical, it's physical.
And you can feel when your brain is growing, right? Like when you've learned something really heavy and you're just like, oh my, yes. Yes, it's just, thank you so much, Joy. I appreciate that. Okay, so we are getting close to the end. We have about 4 minutes left. So I want to make sure that I go through the information. I'm leaving you with one more quote. Authentic engagement begins with remembering that we are wired to connect with one another in communal culture. It is at the center of daily living and learning. So something to kind of take away. So next steps. So we're going to meet in 2 weeks, I believe, October 12th. Thank you so much. I didn't put that one there. So I don't know if it was David or Ben. I appreciate you guys adding that in there. So read chapters 4 and 5. The assignment will be posted sometime later today if it has not been posted yet for chapters 4 and 5. And we're going to be learning about partnerships. So it's going to be an exciting topic. And then couple things. So we have some really cool things for you guys if you guys would like to have more information on this. So the first one is we have the podcast that Aaron shared with us. I really do recommend it. It was really interesting. And David and I were actually talking about how there's a whole series of them. And so like once you heard the first one, you want to listen to the next one and the next one. So you will, I'm sharing that with you. There's also a video that was shared with me on Zaretta Hammond on this specific topic. It is a little long. I haven't had the chance to see it, but I wanted to share out with you guys if you guys would like to. And then the last thing is we have a TED Talks. And this one I found particularly interesting because it was about language and culture. And so I really just enjoyed this perception that every culture and language, like every culture has its language, and the way that we speak really kind of says a little bit about your culture. And the example that she gave that kind of I'm remembering right now was that there was a specific culture, I believe in Australia, that always, instead of saying hello, they talk about what direction they're facing. So like that's how they greet each other, like northwest, southeast. And so I'm terrible with direction. So I think of like how like that culture specifically has the best sense of direction because that's how they greet each other. So I just found it fascinating. She goes into like a lot of different cultures and the language. So I wanted to share that out with you. And then finally, there is no sign-in. We do all of that for you. And I'm not going to play it because we're running out of time. But just a quick little exit ticket. Just if you can take one takeaway from today, chapter 2, 3, it could be something super quick that you can put in the chat, and that will end our session for today. Thank you so much for your participation. We appreciate every single one of you.